Part 3 discusses groundwater. Groundwater is water that has entered the ground from the surface and is trapped in sediment or rock. Groundwater exists primarily in the upper crust of Earth within 20 to 30 kilometers depth. Porosity is the total volume of open space within a material, and it's specified as a percentage. So in this picture, the blue spaces are pore spaces, whereas the gray spaces are sand grains. The tan spaces are also pores, but they are not filled with water, rather filled with air. Permeability refers to the connectedness of pores and exemplifies the ability of a material to allow fluids to pass through it. The permeability is dependent on the number of available conduits, their size, and their straightness. Aquifers are rock units beneath Earth's surface that have high porosity and high permeability. There are unconfined and confined types of aquifers. Aquitards are sediments or rocks that have relatively low permeability and serve as areas that block or do not transmit water flow. The water table is the boundary between the unsaturated zone and the saturated zone beneath Earth's surface. Here we have a diagram of aquifers and aquitards along with the water table. So the water table is the dashed blue line near the top of the diagram that separates areas of where pore spaces is filled with water versus where pore spaces is filled only with air. This top aquifer unit that includes the water table is an unconfined aquifer because it is directly connected to Earth's surface, and water from Earth's surface can infiltrate in the ground and directly contribute to the unconfined aquifer. Beneath the unconfined aquifer is our example of an aquitard, which has low porosity and permeability and doesn't allow water flow. Beneath the aquitard is an example of a confined aquifer, which does have high porosity and permeability and allows water to flow, but is not directly connected to Earth's surface and thus has to acquire water through other means other than the direct addition. The water table in any given area tends to follow the surface topography. So a lens-shaped impermeable aquitard can occur within a thick aquifer, and that lens-shaped aquitard can have a dome-shaped water table directly above it. This mound of groundwater accumulating above the aquitard or the lens of aquitard can be known as a perched water table, and it can exist distinctly from other water tables. Groundwater flow is complex because flow is due to both gravity and pressure. And the area where water enters the ground is known as a recharge area, where the area where groundwater flows back to Earth's surface is known as the discharge area. Darcy's law is a mathematical equation that describes the controls on groundwater flow. Springs are natural outlets from which groundwater flows. Examples include groundwater discharges where the water table intersects the Earth's surface. Another example occurs when water from Earth's surface infiltrates into the ground, then runs into an impermeable layer and exits along the contact or boundary between the impermeable layer and an impermeable layer. Some scientists do not consider these as actual springs, but call them seeps instead. Wells are holes dug down into the earth to reach the water table, from which water is then pumped out. Pumping too fast from aquifers can lower the water table significantly. So in the figures below, we have a well and some wells that are pumping different volumes of water based on their different needs. Artesian wells formed when a confined aquifer under pressure is penetrated and the water rises above the level at which the well penetrated the aquifer. So in our example figure, we've got recharge into a confined aquifer, or an aquifer that is confined in some areas and unconfined in others, and then that water is under high pressures and it is standing above the surface of the ground as well as above the water table from another totally unconfined aquifer. So this is where our flowing artesian well exists. Hot springs are natural springs whose water has a temperature between 30 and 104 degrees Celsius, and they occur where groundwater is heated at depth by an igneous source and then rises to the surface. Geysers occur where hot water fountains out of the ground due to being under high pressure. Most caves form in limestone bedrock because limestone is dissolved by slightly acidic groundwater. Caves form just below the water table as that water dissolves away the rock. Speleothems form when the water level drops below the level of the cave. Water containing dissolved calcite then drips from the ceiling. Calcite precipitates out on the surface to produce rock called travertine. Water that drips from the ceiling form icicle cone shapes called stalactites, whereas water that hits the floor from upward pointing cones create cone shapes called stalagmites. Sinkholes form when the roof of caves collapse. Examples include sinkholes in Florida, where we have dissolution of the limestone rock beneath Earth's surface, and then a reduction of the water table, which produces no support for the overlying rock. The weight of that overlying rock then is too much to be held up by the surrounding material and then crashes and caves in. Karst landscapes form when numerous sinkholes and springs form from dissolution of limestone. Sinkholes fill with water, produce many small lakes. There are also disappearing streams that flow into caves and out again further downstream. Tower karst is created from the erosion of ridges between sinkholes. Here are some more figures of karst development, where dissolution takes place over large geographic areas as a result of changes in the water table. Freshwater is one of humanity's most valuable resources, as it is necessary to sustain life. There are many threats to freshwater supplies that include pollution from human activity, eutrophication, which is an oversupply of nutrients that trigger algae growth, removes too much oxygen from the water, and kills fish and other organisms. Dam construction, which affects the flow of water and sediments, the natural development of streams. Water depletion through overpumping from human activity, and changes in infiltration and sediment supply as a result of road paving and other human activities. These activities create impermeable surfaces so that water doesn't infiltrate into the ground, and losses of vegetation in these areas speeds up erosion downstream. Here's an example of depletion of groundwater supplies from overpumping, causing a lowering of the water table and surface water bodies to dry up, as well as certain wells not being able to pump anymore. Here's an example of contamination of groundwater. Groundwater can be contaminated by natural means if it flows through rocks that contains dissolved calcium and magnesium, which creates hard water unsuitable for human or agricultural use. Humans have introduced many other forms of contamination, including fuel, chemical sewage releases into groundwater.